We're talking about bananas where you can only buy one banana.
You can only buy one. You can't buy a bunch.
In this fruit shop.
Bananas was a terrible example.
No, it made sense. It made sense in my head. Welcome to this week's episode of Property Now, where we are on a mission to make you the property pro in your group chat. Hello, guys.
Hey, Zaz.
We're back.
Good to be back again.
We're back again.
What is this, episode 27?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
I've lost count already.
Million listeners, viewers, off the charts.
I'm feeling pumped today.
Yeah.
There's a big energy in the room
There
today.
is a lot of energy.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, we
definitely.
got a big topic, so we need that energy to harness and get into this monster topic, which is we are talking about housing supply today.
Or lack of.
Or lack of. And this topic, it's in the news a lot, and rightly so. It is a massive issue. And, in the last week, we've had major publications highlighting the issue from a range of angles. We've had The Australian drawing similarities between the housing affordability crisis in Australia and gun violence in America, which we will come back to that because that was quite a shocking comparison, I thought. We saw a piece in Macro Business highlight Australia's severely impacted housing supply and decade-low housing construction indicators, which I will definitely have questions about that later, calling for immediate government action, including the suggestion to moderate immigration levels. And we saw news across several publications, The Guardian, SMH, that New South Wales Premier Chris Minn, he had a busy week. He is planning ways to speed up the process of approving new building designs to create more homes faster, with the introduction of a pattern book, which is another new term I learned in the last week. I had not heard of a pattern book before. So yes, as we know, it's a massive problem. I'm really curious to dig in to, how we got here, how this problem sort of started, and how we get out of it, and, what it means for property buyers as well.
Talk me through the gun violence. What's the relation there with...
Yeah, so I think basically it was kind of a case of like a bit of a clickbaity title, and it definitely worked with me because I was like, my goodness, what is this about?
Well, it made it to the show.
It did make it to the show. But I guess basically the gist of it was that the housing affordability, housing supply crisis in Australia is such a massive issue that is so ingrained in our society at the moment that it is as big of a problem and as hard to address as gun violence in America.
Right.
So the article sort of spoke about the issue, and then it ended with a line of, I forget the exact words, but it was something along the lines of like, there are similarities between what is going on here, just in terms of the size of the issue and how hard it is to fix. Obviously, I don't personally agree with saying that housing supply is...
It's random. It's not like a kid's going to walk into a school one day and buy all these houses.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, it was an interesting piece, and there were, a lot of points. It spoke about the factors that contribute to the housing affordability crisis, like population growth, limited supply, high rents, worsened by governance issues, homelessness, and all this other stuff.
But the link could be, that they're both persistent issues, right? Is that it's not like it's something new, right? It's not as if gun violence just came out or became an issue in the US only recently. It's not like housing supply has been an issue only from the last 12 months, right? So during the property cycles and the prices have gone up significantly, those are also supply issues, right? So is it saying that is this housing supply issue a new problem? It's not, right?
It could also be that everyone has an opinion. Like you go to the States and people have their right to bear arms. Others are saying, look how they do it in Australia. Look what happened. We all know that story. It's same in Australia. You've talked about people talking about, less immigration or how do we build more houses or what. So everyone has an opinion, an answer, a solution. And the answer or the solution, there's probably a few different ways it could be done. And there's probably combinations of ways where it could work as well.
Yeah, Mike, that's a good point. I think what maybe it's trying to say is the magnitude of the issue of gun issues in America is the same as the magnitude of the issue of housing supply in Australia. Yeah. And as you said, Mike, the problem isn't going away. But from my time in the property industry, I can't remember a time where housing and housing supply has been such an issue, and in the media every couple of days or consistently, and every government from federal to the state governments perhaps maybe not so much the local governments, but from federal and state governments, all talking about the housing supply issue. And it's a problem that's going to take years to fix, but the policies need to be done today to get this into a point of being fixed. The housing supply issue is probably caused by policies that were enacted 5 or 6 years ago, such as talking on investors, such as the foreign buyer stamp duty. I understand why they brought that in, to limit foreign ownership of whether it's apartments or houses. But that's now led to a shortage of rental properties and leading to a rental crisis, because those usually are investment stock when foreign buyers buying property. So that's led to some of the housing supply.
Yeah, but that's an interesting point, Chris, because I saw on TikTok, I think it was from one of the senators that's doing a lot of work around addressing housing supply. I can't exactly recall his name, but there's a clip about a Senate hearing recently where I think that the Foreign Investment Review Board, was being questioned around foreign ownership, and he was asking, when you buy a property, do you have to prove your residency status, right? So how do you know the statistics around what foreign ownership is? Because the argument was that the amount of foreign ownership is quite negligible. So it's like 0 point something % or whatever. But his argument was, well, how do you know that, right? Like, how do you know that the person buying what sort of visa status? And they were explaining how they'll match it using ATO records and stuff like that. So what I got out of that was, I don't know whether that's a sort of big reason around housing supply shortages, because it's or whether that's a generalization. It'd be interesting to look at the actual statistics. Is how many, for example, foreign people or buyers are actually purchasing property in the scheme of things.
True, Jason. But I guess there's more than one reason. It wouldn't be the only reason.
Correct.
And I think with every policy, what's important is there's no solution that's going to fix it forever. Things need to be monitored and changed, because with every action has a reaction. All right. So we learnt that in science. And it is applicable here as well. So you look at what Anastasia Palaszczuk has done now in Queensland, where first home buyers grant has doubled, right, to $30,000. Great for first home buyers, but that is definitely going to have a react. Now there's a reason that's being put in place, but eventually it's going to raise prices, because this is free money. To up to $800,000, for example. So there will be a reaction to that action, and we're going to see that with every policy that he's put in place. So we'll talk, I'm sure, about Chris Minn's in New South Wales as well with his pattern book, and there's definitely a lot of pressure from bigger developers here in New South Wales for the government to improve the speed in which they approve DAs. Right, because that is a slow process. There's a lot of red tape, and you'll see, and you'll know this, Chris, developers, it can take, they might buy a site in 2014, they haven't started building to 2021. It's a lot of time, and that's a big reason why, there is an undersupply. But so now we're trying to improve that and trying to speed that up. But even something like that, like starting an architectural pattern book to improve the speed, it's going to take a while to get to a point where these design patterns are in place and ready to go. So by the time that's complete, I don't know if you guys want to dig into that. But
well, yeah, I think let's break it down, because like I said, I hadn't heard of a pattern book before.
Neither have I.
Yeah. So what exactly, and I'm kind of looking at you too, because Jason and I are
have a think
the same
about,
boat.
You've travelled, Saz,
I have travelled,
You've
yes.
travelled. Have you been to parts of Europe, or have you been to Manhattan? Have you been to New York?
I have not, no.
Okay.
But I've been to parts of Europe. Yeah.
So there's a lot of towns and cities across Europe. You go to Italy, you go to UK, you go to Spain, where all the buildings kind of look the same.
Yeah.
That's an architectural pattern. So it's been happening in Europe for hundreds of years.
Right.
Where you go to Florence and everything is the same kind of design.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. And back then they did it for housing of the people in their areas. And Europe does middle density really well. So you go to parts of London, or you go to most towns in Italy, there's these middle dense sort of towns where it's all 6 stories. You would have seen it. You would have seen it when you just went recently.
Yeah.
6-story towns, everyone's in the piazza, all the cafes, there's everyone's there, right? But then you leave 5 minutes outside of that town and it's farms.
Yeah.
And Europe does that well. Whereas You know, you go to places in the States and it's kind of a little bit like that too. So an example of pattern building in the US, the ABC buildings in Manhattan. So all those brown brick, everything looks the same. And that was done more recently, right? And that's more that's more housing commission sort of style as well. So there's reasons to do it. And usually the reason is speed, right?
Of course, yeah.
But so what a pattern book would be is typically it can be, hey, there's X amount of full designs or there's part designs. So, you know, a pattern book might say, hey, a stairwell should look like this. Mm-hmm. Here's an example stairwell that you can just sort of plonk in like a Tetris piece into your design. But what I think we're seeing with Chris Minn's, according to their press release, is so they're looking at obviously pattern books for middle density, so R2 zoned areas around Sydney, and there's probably about 32 councils around, you know, inner west, further out, down to the south, parts of the north as well, where there's R2 zoning for middle density. So that can be townhouses, terrace houses, you know, anything up to like 6-story apartment blocks.
I think it's R3 and R4 as well.
It does?
Yeah, it can go up to R3 and R4, which is middle and higher density.
Yep.
So anything with 6 stories generally is in like an R4 zone.
So what they might say, so they'll put it out to a design competition with international and Australian-based architects. What a design competition is essentially is a pitch, right? So they're saying, hey, this is our ideas for your design. Do you agree? And if you agree, you pay us for our time. You know, so that's what a design competition is. And what they want to have in this pattern book is, you know, 5 versions of each style. So there'll be 5 terraces, 5 3-story apartments, right, 5 6-story apartments, et cetera, and what a developer can then do is say, hey, yep, this site is good for a 6-story development. We choose pattern design number 3 and it gets approved straight away.
Yeah, wow.
Okay.
Okay.
That's interesting.
But there's a lot of things we need to think about in the lead up too, right? So the design competition will take time. You know, people need to express their interest. There'll be a time to make the designs. There'll be a time for judging. So it could be like a year or more before this is sort of sorted. But you also need to decide, you know, can this design actually be built to budget? And
is it feasible?
Is it feasible? So will a developer be able to say, yep, okay, I've got this beautiful site in the inner west. I'm going to choose pattern 3. Will it actually work? And Chris, you might be able to speak more as an ex-developer.
Yeah.
You may be able to speak a little bit more
look,
on
I think
this.
that's a really good summary of what it is. And in terms of getting it up and running, you know, I want to see more detail. I actually think it's a fantastic announcement, to be honest, to get things moving, to get approvals happening faster. What it does is it takes the objectivity away probably from local council, who also sometimes have competing interests. You know, all levels of government sometimes aren't aligned. And we're seeing that at the moment, to be honest, where from federal government to state government, very aligned with getting housing supply out there. And local government, not as much in some areas. The NIMBY movement is still definitely out there.
So, Chris, do you think that's the main reason that, you know, not in my backyard, you know, I live in a house, the streets are tree lined, parking's not an issue, I don't want any high-density developments. There's going to be more people, more traffic.
The not in my backyard movement, I understand it, but it's not a long-term strategy.
Yeah,
at the end of the day, if you're saying you don't want development in your backyard, and I'm going to plug out an area here being the Northern Beaches.
Right.
If you're saying you don't want development, in 20 years' time when you're still living there and you've got a hospital there in 20 years' time and you're going to that hospital, where are the nurses and the doctors that are wanting to work at that hospital going to live? If there's no density, if there's no additional housing in that location, do you want them to travel for 2 hours to get to work? So it's going to affect them in a negative way in the long run. But I think it's a responsibility for everyone to say, well, you know what, there are young people and there are investors and there are downsizers that may want to downsize into a smaller apartment or a townhouse from a large house, even on the Northern Beaches or anywhere in New South Wales or Australia, that we should be able to give them the option to do so without having this NIMBY movement. And there's a new movement called YIMBY, which is, you know, that's a great movement that's putting housing back on the map.
And YIMBY is for...
Yes, in my backyard.
Yes, in my backyard.
Yes. So, you know, it's a movement that's getting a lot of steam in Australia now. And it's an important one because we do need housing supply in well-located areas where jobs are to make sure people aren't travelling for 2 hours or even an hour to get to work. You know, that's a really important problem to solve with housing supply in well-located areas.
You hear about it a lot, the missing middle. You know, especially in Sydney and all parts of Australia, we have a missing middle. And you go back to the European scenario where the town is there and everyone's there and you work there and you live there and you eat there and you socialise there. Whereas with Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane as well to a degree, you've got your city where everyone goes to work, and then we started spreading out, and my grandparents will tell me about when the western suburbs were like Ashfield. That was like working class western suburbs, and now that's like inner west, and the western suburbs are now, out to Blacktown and Campbelltown, and that's, things have changed dramatically. But Sydney has moved out. Like the urban sprawl has been crazy, and it's nice, everyone wants a big backyard, although backyards aren't as big even the further out you go now these days. It's a topic for another day. But what we've done is we've kept spreading out, and which is great. We've got so much room here in Australia, so it makes a lot of sense. But what doesn't make sense is the infrastructure that is required for these people. So if you're building a whole new suburb out in the southwest towards Wollongong, then you need schools and you need hospitals and you need transport and you need all these things that need to start from scratch, right? So, I know people that have moved out that way, and they're still waiting for the infrastructure to happen. And it will be a while before it does. So we've missed this whole middle ground of Sydney where, where I live, for example, Canada Bay sort of area, I'm seeing houses being knocked down and duplexes being put up, but we're not probably seeing enough 3, 4, 5, 6-story apartment complexes, which, if planned right, can look nice, can be a little bit more affordable, and can bring more people into the area. And what you're seeing already is we've got infrastructure. We've got transport, we've got hospitals, we've got places where people can socialise, we've got great schools. They're already there. So what you need to do then is just make sure that the infrastructure in place is improved so that it can handle the extra people rather than having to start from scratch. And that's the missing middle that we hear about a lot, which, we've probably been missing in planning. And it goes back to what you said, Chris. A lot of the planning in the past has been localised councils. Yes. So, Northern Beaches or parts of the inner west, they say, no, we don't want to change, even though, from a broader, and this is why I agree with you on what Chris Minn is trying to do here, we're looking at it holistically from a greater New South Wales perspective, not like a Marrickville or a Glebe or a Parramatta perspective, which is really good.
Mike, that's a really important point as well, because local governments, when they're elected, it's by the local constituents in that region. So generally, if it is Northern Beaches or wherever it is, they generally don't want development in that area. Yeah. And so that local member is there to support the people that they've been elected by. So if that local constituency doesn't want housing supply, for then the local member to then say, no, we want housing supply, he's going against what he's been voted in for. Yeah. So there's a misalignment between local government, state government and federal governments who want housing supply. And I think that's rapidly changing. And I think New South Wales have done a very good job to potentially set the benchmark for other states as to what to do to get out of the way of planning supply.
I was going to ask that. Other states and territories in Australia aren't doing this pattern book thing?
Not yet has been announced. Yeah, but okay. I imagine, given what's happening in the housing supply discussion, Zara, I think there's going to be a lot more of this come out, and it needs to come out, because there's a point where there's got to be a point where government says, we've done all we can now, it's up to the private sector to actually get on with the job. And if they've got out of the way and made housing approvals or development application approvals in 6 to 12 months, as opposed to 3 or 4, even 10 years sometimes, depending on what it is. If they've done that to get out of the way, to get housing supply, I think that's a huge tick for the development industry to get housing supply that needs to happen and is happening. So I'm really keen to see the details that's coming out next year of the pattern book. My only one concern is about character. You want to make sure that it's just not sort of these existing slap them up sort of developments. You want to make sure that there is some character about that, and maybe having 4 or 5 designs, template designs, maybe you might lose a bit of that character, but I'm hoping that there'll be some design elements that they include that could help on character of buildings.
I have no doubt, because they're going to a competition, they will be nice, they will look nice, but I don't know how comfortable I feel personally about seeing the same apartment complex in Parramatta, in Pyrmont, in everywhere. And I don't know, there's just something about it that seems a bit strange to me. It's the first, I think it's because it's the first time it's really happened in that way. So we talk about parts of Europe, that's condensed to one town where, you go to Bath in the UK and everything looks the same. Whereas here it's more spread out. So it'll be interesting to see how that works.
It's happened before, I guess. In Redfern, you had those 3-level walk-up terrace houses. But not to the extent how it's happening.
Not like this. look, I think from a design perspective, they'll look nice, you know, and there'll be options, which is great. I want to know, I guess, from you, Chris, as well, like, so that's one problem being solved, the speed in which things are getting approved. And I think for government to say, yep, we'll get out of the way so developers can develop, I think that's a great solution. But one of the biggest issues we're seeing in terms of supply at the moment is the cost of materials, cost of labour. So yes, if developers can get things approved faster, that's great. But if it still costs them more to build something than they will get by selling it, does this solve that problem, or is there?
That's still a problem that needs to work through. So there's four main components when you're talking about a feasibility. There's a bunch of little items, but there's four main components when you're talking about a feasibility for a development site. So number one, it starts with land. So what's the land cost? That's a fixed amount when you've purchased your land. The second part is construction costs. What are the construction costs? Taxes is another massive one. And then the fourth one, which isn't a cost, but it's then your revenue, so your sales. What can I sell this property for? Now, if your land cost, if you've purchased, as a developer, if you've purchased the site in the last 5 years, your land cost is fixed, if not continuing to go up as you have holding costs. What's happened now is you've got your revenue is fixed as well at the moment because prices aren't going up how developers need them to go up to get the projects out of the ground and make projects feasible. But what's happened is you've got construction costs that have eaten away at developer margins to get the projects off the ground. And those margins are there because there's a substantial amount of risk that a developer takes when undertaking sites. You know, they hold them for 3 to 10 years sometimes. So there's a substantial amount of risk. So that, without an elevation in the revenue side of things, being the sales prices they can achieve for properties, it's still going to be very difficult to get projects out of the ground from a feasibility perspective. And we're seeing that across the country.
Could the pattern book resolve some of those? I know, like, you know, they don't have to... And look, it's worth saying as well, developers don't need to use these. They can still go the old way,
Correct.
Get something designed, get something approved. That's fine, and that needs to happen. But if you're cutting out, you know, potentially design costs, because it's already been done, you're cutting out, like, cost estimating and all that sort of thing because it's sort of already done. And potentially you might see there might be some builders that specialize in these pattern designs. So if they've done them a few times, then maybe that could bring down some building costs. Yeah. Is it going to help with that?
It's going to help. It's definitely going to help. I mean, there'll be architects that come out and do this, the pattern design side of things. It's going to help, in my opinion, it's going to help projects going forward. If you've already purchased your site, you've probably in council already with your DA plans, trying to either get them approved or they've been approved, so you may not be going back to the drawing board. So it's going to help projects going forward. Is it going to help immediately with housing supply? It's going to unlock the barriers in the future. But what I like about it is housing and property is that there's no quick fix. It needs a long-term solution with long-term thinking, and I think that's what Chris Minn has done really well. He understands that it's not going to be fixed overnight, and it needs support of government, industry to work together and cohesively to remove the red tape and the barriers. And I think that's what it achieves. So I think let's have this discussion in 5 years' time and see that's going to be the true test. Because I think there will be a reduction in DA approval time, development application approval time, and there'll be housing coming out because of this policy that's happened now.
We'll have to mark that in our calendars, episode 257 of the podcast. We'll talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Chris, you've said it's a really good step, but do you think that state government is doing enough right now? Do you think federal government is doing enough right now to fix this? You know, like you said, you've never seen the issue be as bad as it is now. Is enough being done? And
look, the other, again, talking about the feasibility side of things, the only other component they could look at is the tax part. In a development, the tax component can make up sometimes 20 to 40% of the cost of a site. Whether you're talking about GST, land tax, council contributions, there's a range of taxes that are built in to development projects and ultimately the profit margins of a developer, and at the end of the day gets passed on to the consumer. Are they doing enough? I think sometimes there's a point where government is doing too much and then artificially propping up the housing market. So there's got to be a point where the government says we've done everything we can, and there's got to be a less reliance almost from the private sector on the government and look to push it forward. I think that's sometimes, you know, there's talks about I mean, again, as you mentioned with Queensland, Mike, with the additional first home buyer
Yeah,
grant,
they've doubled the first
from
home buyer
15 to
grant.
30,000.
Yeah.
We all know what happened during COVID with the home building grant. I mean, Jason, you probably saw that firsthand with some clients that had signed
Yeah,
up.
100%, 100%, because that was also available for renovations. So that's, I mean, it's a long time now, but I think it was the $25,000 boost that the government gave you in cash, literally. If you're building a home or you're doing major renovations, right? So during lockdown and all that sort of stuff, if you're not building a new home, you've got your money saved up because you haven't gone to any overseas holidays. You're going to do some renovations, and how great is it that the government's kicking in $25,000 to help you build your new deck? Right.
Yeah.
So that created massive demand, right, for tradies, and that's still, we're still feeling the effects of the cost of construction that we're talking about right now. And it was just ironic that was something that I remember that the building industry really lobbied for during that time. That's sort of, what's the government going to do for the construction industry to support us during this period? And they got it. But now we're seeing all these construction companies, building companies going down. I'm not necessarily saying that was the direct consequence, but probably has something to do with it, right?
Could be a reaction.
Yeah.
To the action.
Yeah, exactly right.
It could be an example of government doing too much to try and, particularly during COVID. Again, no one knew what was going to happen during COVID, but you had a situation where that announcement was made, the $25,000 grant, and you had a lot of builders going to sign up fixed price contracts. So what it did was it artificially propped up the market for demand. And then obviously we have the inflation story that happened as a result of it. Construction costs and building materials going up 50% probably in some locations. Availability of labour was becoming a huge problem. So there has to be a point where the government says, we've done everything we can. It's now over to the private sector to get things moving. So that's probably where I'm at, to be honest. I think if government gets out of the way of planning and they move that hurdle out of the way, there's probably a responsibility on private sector to then say, okay, the hurdles have been removed. What we've been calling for years to be removed, the hurdles have been removed to some extent. Let's get on with it and move forward if the feasibilities work. But that's also the issue.
What level of government too? Because I think some of the biggest things holding us back, you're talking about the NIMBY movement, so it's always been like a local government thing to approve these DAs, and now a state government stepping in, but when you're talking about all the taxes, are they state taxes, are they federal taxes, we might have too many levels of government getting their hands involved here.
Well, it's every level. There's taxes from every level. So council contributions is obviously for local council. GST and land tax generally is for state governments. But the federal government is announcing a lot of housing measures, and so are state governments. But then it goes down the line for the local governments to approve. So you sort of got the left hand not speaking to the right hand, where federal and state want housing supply, but then it all ultimately goes down to local government to approve this housing supply. So that's where the bottleneck is happening, and perhaps there's not a connection between the actual what federal and state government needs and even what the people need, which is more housing, to the local government and what they've actually been elected for, which may be not to have housing supply in that area, as I've mentioned earlier.
Yeah. I think one of the other things that comes up a lot when you read about housing supply is the housing affordability crisis. We hear about, the housing supply crisis, housing affordability crisis. I'm interested as well to kind of, unpack how those two correlate. And again, I'm always thinking, what does that mean for buyers? What does that mean for first home buyers and lower income families and all that, especially? Who wants to take that one?
The biggest question we hear out there is like, if inflation's up, if interest rates are up, why aren't property prices going down? Why are they still sort of tracking upwards? And it's supply is a big reason for that.
Yeah.
So that's and to make it really simple, like if you got 100 bananas and 50 people want a banana, then bananas are going to be cheap because the fruit shops can't sell them fast enough. They've only got 50 buyers when 100 bananas. But if you've got 100 bananas, I don't know why I've used bananas as the example.
You used bananas in the other podcast as well.
I'll say apples. No. But if you've got 100 bananas and 200 people want a banana, then we can charge whatever we want for bananas, right? So, and that's what's happening with housing at the moment. They're not being built fast enough, or developers have stopped, or not as many. There might be less people selling than there was a couple of years ago, but there's certainly less people buying. So, but anyway, there's a whole...
Are we talking about bananas or housing now?
Mate,
we're talking about bananas where you can only buy one banana.
You can only buy one. You can't buy a bunch.
In this fruit shop.
Bananas was a terrible example.
No, it made sense. It made sense in my head. Odd choice.
I think it does make sense. And supply and demand, right?
Exactly.
So you've got the affordability crisis, which has been worsened by the rental crisis, which we now know that immigration is pushing up the rental crisis issue, is making the rental crisis issue worse. Generally, when people come to Australia to start a new life, they're generally not buying straight away. They might be entering into a rental property for a couple of years and then looking to purchase. So the immigration side of things is sucking up a lot of the rental properties and creating a rental supply crisis or supply issue. And then we've got the issue on housing supply, and you were talking about approvals, how they relate. Yeah. So if you have a slow approval rate and developers can't get new housing supply into the market, that's going to mean that the demand, as Michael was saying, I've got bananas in my head.
The banana demand, yeah.
All you've got now is the same house, 30 people want the one house, the one property, because there's not 30 properties anymore. So, because there's no new development happening. So that's the correlation. And then naturally prices have to go up because of the demand side of it.
Mm. So if we can build more and we can build
that's
faster,
the idea. Yes.
Which is kind of what this pattern book is getting at.
Yes.
We can get more people into homes and prices will come down.
Absolutely.
Happy days.
And there's everyone had you mentioned one of the articles is talking about like immigration.
Yeah.
And like, is there too much immigration? Should we be slowing that down? But like again, I think the theme here today is like every action has a reaction. I keep saying that when I'm not talking about bananas. That's what I'm saying. But we need people coming into the country because hey, they're the ones that are like building. A lot of the painters and the gyprockers and the tilers, like they're coming from these migrants that are willing that are doing these jobs, and they're good at they're skilled at these jobs as well. So if you cut them out, then we've got less people building, so then the wages go up for builders, for tradies, which is what we saw during like COVID. Like there was less people coming in or people leaving, going back home. So we had less tradies, less skilled people. Their wages were going up, costs going up, and it was just there's this whole chain reaction. So, people talking about migration or stopping migration as a potential solution. Like, I just see that a decision like that would just be
there's the flow-on effects.
It would be terrible. Yeah.
It's double-edged sword with that, Mike.
Yeah.
I mean, we do need people to come in to help on the labour shortage side, but then they take up the rental supply and housing supply. So.
What's the balance?
Well, the balance, they need to find the balance.
Yeah.
So cutting off immigration completely, that's definitely not the answer.
Yeah.
Having 3 million a year people coming in, that's not the answer. I think it's at currently 500,000 per annum. Maybe that's a little bit too much, just based off the rental side of things. And they can taper those numbers, and they should accordingly. But talking on the government side of things and some of what they can do, we've got the grants that are coming out for first home buyers. Very important. A lot of first home buyers using those grants. But it's a segment of the market that's very important. But we need to be looking at all segments and all buyers in the market. So from first home buyers to investors to downsizers to right sizers, they are all very important buyers and buyer profiles in the property industry and in the development side of things. Rather than just carving out one section and completely focusing on just first home buyers, it's very important, particularly for housing supply and rental supply, that all participants in the market can get in and can help get developments off the ground. If you're talking on large scale developments, if it's a 1,000 apartment development, you need all those segments in the market purchasing to get those projects off the ground.
So why would, Jace, this might be one for you, man.
Yeah, right.
Why would, say, Queensland government be doubling first home buyer grants at the moment? Like, what is the reason for that right now? Why are they trying to push that?
Yeah, look, buyers? I mean, it could very well be political, right? Because there's it just depends on which kind of idea that they subscribe to, right? So the government might subscribe to an idea that it's more popular to just hand money out, right, rather than addressing the core issues, right? And I think that's always an issue regarding all these topics that we're talking about, is because the government needs to make popular decisions, not always the best decision and not always the long-term decisions for its people, right? Because of the terms of government and needing to get re-elected. So, for example, there was an article in I think the Sydney Morning Herald a few months ago talking about Chris Minn, that when he was an MP, he was part of the NIMBY movement. He was against development because his constituents who elected him, that's what you're talking about, Chris, were against it, right? Were against density. But now, because of the position he's in, you know, he's had to change his perspective to address the issues in the state, right? So I think that's an issue, is that I think there's a lot of analysis around just handing money out, and we've seen it as evidence, you know, with the money handed out by the government in COVID, the home builder grant, you know, all these incentives where you just hand cash, doesn't necessarily help the issue, doesn't address the core issue. There's a possibility that prices go up just because now the first home buyers can afford an extra $15,000. And Chris, you touched on how the developers' feasibility studies relies on the revenue modelling, right? That they need to sell at a certain price. You know, so does that actually address the issue? But it's certainly a popular issue, you know, because giving you $30,000 is a lot more popular than giving you $15,000.
And we've all, or the three of us, last week we found out that we all used the first home buyers grant when we first started.
Actually, no, I didn't.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Sorry.
Oh.
Okay. Well, you did?
Yeah.
Yes. I did.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, great. If you're a first home buyer, awesome. Someone's giving me cash. But I think you look at it in a broader picture and you go, well, are these first home buyers in Queensland, they're getting an extra $15K to spend. What are you going to do? You're going to spend it, right? So are they spending an extra $15K for the same house that they're going to buy anyway? So does that inflate prices in that sub $800K sort of market?
Oh, I think so. Certainly. And you'll see certain property prices, you know, being inflated to kind of just be under that particular threshold as well, right? Because you're getting that extra $15K of free money.
Yeah.
Right. So
I think what it does, Jason, it creates a flaw in the market. So if there were properties, which apparently there's not that many properties that are under 750, new build properties in any case, to get the $30,000 grant. But what it does though is if there is properties for 500, 600, it'll bring them up and it'll create a new floor of 750 across the state.
Yeah.
750 becomes the low point.
Well, because everyone's bidding up to that point to get the grant.
And that's why I'm just wondering why they made that decision, you know, because we know, looking at properties we've seen in Queensland, right, through Composite, you know, there's nothing like that in the Gold Coast, certainly in like Metro Brisbane. Like, so you're looking at, you know, Southwest, you're looking at Logan, you're looking at north of Brisbane, you're looking at like these house and land sort of, Burpengary, places like that where, there is still properties for under that price. But are they trying to get people moving out of the cities? Is that the goal? Like, I just don't know what the goal is.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because you asked that question, why are they doing it? Because I think Victoria is getting rid of it or gotten rid of it.
Yeah.
So Victoria had the 10K for new builds as a, you know, grant.
Yeah.
And the reason for getting rid of it is the studies show that it doesn't help housing affordability for first home buyers, right? So, you know, there's the research and the data, but then there's the popular political decision, right?
Wait, Jace, can you break that down for me a little bit? So it doesn't help. Giving out first home buyer grants doesn't help with housing affordability for first home buyers. Correct.
So, you know, the article that I was reading was citing that the research and the studies that they've conducted show that just handing out money as a grant compared to things like helping first home buyers potentially save on stamp duty and things like that.
Right, yeah, okay.
Has different impacts. It's not as effective, right, in addressing that issue.
Do you think instead of, if it's a $30,000 grant, if they were going to spend 600, do you think they just go, well, I can spend 630 now?
Exactly.
So it doesn't change.
I was going to say, if your budget's 600, all of a sudden
think
your
budget doesn't come down.
And that's what I was saying before.
More.
You're still going to buy probably the same house.
Yeah.
But you're now paying more.
Now.
And you don't feel that more that you're paying, and it's just money in the system, inflation, especially if it's a new build. But it's, again, from a political standpoint, it's much sexier than saying, oh yeah, we're going to give you less, but it's less tax here.
Do you reckon it's political, Queensland?
Potentially, man. Like, is there an election coming up? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, there's always an election happening.
Or like another reason could be that it's a quick fix.
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier just to make an announcement on a policy that we're just going to give money.
But our politicians are just in this habit now of like throwing money at the problem, and it's causing more problems.
Yeah, but Mike, I've got to say on the Chris Minn's announcement, that's, in my view, that's taking a long-term view.
That's different.
Yeah.
That's definitely taking a long-term view. It's not just throwing money out there saying, hey, you've got grants now you can use to get into property. Developers and industry have been saying approval times are taking too long. This is a direct response to that issue.
Yeah.
And saying, okay, we hear what you're saying. Development times are taking too long. We're going to take that issue out of market to a degree and help get approvals done. I think he's saying in 6 to 12 months now. If you adopt a design or a template design, they're calling it, from the pattern book, it could be a 6 to 12 month approval as opposed to what it is now, which could be bloody 3-4 years.
So have they addressed that issue around the competing objectives between the local government that you were talking about, that the constituents elect?
Well, it'll be overridden. So it'll be state government approval. So similar to how in New South Wales anyway, there's a CDC, which is called a complying development, that you can adopt a design, and that gets approved pretty much straight away.
So basically you're bypassing the local government,
you're bypassing
the council.
The local council, yes.
Yeah, right.
And the objectivity that comes from that process. Look, not knocking local councils here, but you may just have a local councillor and an assessment officer in the local council that just doesn't like your design. It's a subjective. And that could delay your approval just by someone not liking a design by years.
It goes back to what you're saying before, though. A local council's goals and objectives are going to be different to the wider view of a state government and the wider still view of a federal government as well. So
that's exactly right, Mike. Yeah. It's taking the state government approach instead of an individual person deciding, and again, they might not like your design, or they might not want density in their local area. So they're not approving it for those reasons.
Cutting out the middleman.
So it's cutting out that. I mean, we need housing supply. It's obvious that given the rental vacancy, or the low rental vacancy rates, where housing supply, we need housing supply. So the whole idea of NIMBY has to go away, and we have to get development approvals fast tracked, and we have to get building.
Yeah.
Let's get building.
Let's get building. Does do you reckon the pattern book and other initiatives that may come out off the back of that, does that help at all, or does that impact housing affordability for lower income households, first home buyers? I know like if there's more supply, prices should in theory come down, right? Maybe? No? Like when supply is limited, there's more demand for less supply. Oh my God, I feel like I'm back in economics right now.
Just think about
and
the bananas.
Prices go up. I'm thinking about bananas. Yeah.
Well, I think long term, if you take so short term, there's going to be ups and downs in property. But if you take a long term view to property, I think history will show you that there's always an appreciation in property prices. And I think you've said that property purchasing is a game of finance.
Yeah, that's right.
One of the original pods, and I really like that because that's actually what it is. So going back to your question, Zara, so does this approval process, fast tracking approvals, bring down prices? It'll bring into supply into the market. I don't think it'll bring down prices.
Well, probably can slow down the acceleration of the prices going up.
Yeah, okay.
But not necessarily make the prices go backwards.
Yeah,
right.
That'd be nice.
It could also have a lifestyle impact. So, for example, say you grew up in a suburb, you love it, you want to have a family there, whatever. This is long-term planning. You may not be able to afford to buy there when you eventually buy your own place, right?
Yeah.
So you have to move further out. Well, all of a sudden, if there's a greater supply of like 2-3 bedroom apartments in that suburb, they might be more in your price range when you're buying your first property.
Yeah.
So you can sort of start there and eventually work your way up into the family home in the suburb that you want to live. So you're staying in that neighbourhood with people that you know, the schools that you know, the shops that you know, all that sort of thing. And it's not for everyone. But yeah, from a lifestyle perspective, it's just starting to climb that ladder, and there's more opportunities to sort of be a part of that community and remain a part of that community. So that could be something that would change with something like this potentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, like again, the big question, I don't think any government wants property prices to drop dramatically. That would be disastrous as well. So it's just finding balancing act as always.
I think what helps with the affordability, as Jason was saying, property prices may not go up as fast. And so the time factor would help. So again, we talk about when we bought our properties that it was, I think at the time, 8 to 10 times income, whereas today it's like 20 times income. Maybe that ratio of increasing wage to sort of debt income ratio doesn't increase as fast.
Yeah, it slows it down.
Yeah, like if we've seen it increase 2 times from 10 to 20 in the last 10 years, you know, maybe let's hope it doesn't get from 20 to 40 in another 10 years. Hopefully that part slows down, because that's the important part, even if that can come backwards, where people's wages increase, whereas housing doesn't go up as fast. History would suggest that that's not going to happen, but
it gives us time to catch up.
We've got hope, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Chris. And that's where there's comparisons, you know, when, Michael, you mentioned the generational wars, right? Is that interest rates have been higher in the last generation, you know, for the baby boomers, but you know, the price of property as a multiplier of their wages is a lot lower than today, right? So even though, you know, interest rates are, I don't know, 12, 14, 17%, I've heard, it was still affordable to buy property, or that property was still affordable, right? Whereas now the interest rate's less than half that, people's income are higher, but just the rate of growth, it's not in pace with how quickly the value of property has been going up, right? And that could be the issue that supply can address, is not necessarily bring the prices down, but to slow that acceleration so that people's wages hopefully can catch up. And you know, it's not going to be 20 times your income, your household income, to purchase a property with a massive mortgage, right?
And if they can achieve that with increased supply coming in and prices stay stable for a few years, that will help with that factor, with wages catching up. And what's the next best for someone trying to get into the market? What's the next best thing for property? You know, if it's going up, the next best thing is for property to stay stable.
There's so many I'm just thinking out loud now too, there's so many micro factors in each suburb.
There is.
Like if you know, we're knocking down houses and building apartments in a suburb, then the apartments are affordable, but the houses that remain in that suburb they're going to rise in value as well. So there's all these little sub-markets within the market as well. Like it's not just there's not one linear, we do this, everything's going to go up, or everything's going to be more affordable, or whatever. There's just so many factors within each suburb. It's crazy. And that's why each decision is so important.
Yeah, it's like, honestly, it's like the butterfly effect. What did you say 10 times this episode? Every action has a reaction.
Yeah.
I learned something in science class.
Yeah, it's talking about bananas.
That's exactly right.
Every banana has a...
God, I feel like a banana now.
This podcast brought to you by Australian Bananas.
It's our sponsor.
Yeah.
Well, guys, that might be a good time to wrap it up, I think. Were there any sort of final thoughts that we wanted to get out there to the listeners?
Oh, look, I think just from my perspective, congratulations to Chris Minn in the announcement. Let's see the details. Let's get it out there.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a good result for developers to be able to fast track approval time, whether it's industry groups or developers who have been calling for this to happen, to be able to reduce approval times. I think this is a good solution. Let's see the details as always, but I'm looking forward to it coming out and hopefully reducing DA approval time so more supply can come to the market.
Yeah,
so,
and we will see the flow-on effects of that.
Yes. And I do like that it's not just a short-term approach, to be honest. I like that it's going to take years to help see the impacts, but that's good policy. Good policy shouldn't be short-term.
It's rare to see government policy that will continue
view.
after the current.
Look, he's not just looking at the next few years for his appointment.
Yeah.
If he's only staying for a couple of years, he could get re-elected. But I think that's something I really like, that he's taking a long-term view. It's not just throwing money out there. It's a design guide. It's something that can help improve and reduce approval time. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the details.
Watch this space.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, guys.
Banana comment?
Yeah, anything else on fruit?
I also like apples, mangoes.
Fruit man. All right, guys. Thank you very much. We'll wrap it there. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Property Now. Make sure you are following us on social media, subscribe on YouTube so you never miss an episode. And if you had any thoughts or feedback on today's episode, we would love to hear from you. So leave those in the comments, leave us a review, and we will be sure to get back to you in next week's ep. See you then. The Property Now podcast offers opinions on Australian property news for informational and entertainment purposes only, and they are general in nature. It does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. It does not constitute professional advice. Always seek expert guidance before making any property-related decisions.